knowing that clients who may still be in a situation that isn't super safe, having them leave your office, you're kind of like, please don't go.
Yeah.
But understanding that that person does have the resources that they need, and that, you know, even if something does happen, your office will still be there the week following. And understanding that they do have what they need to take care of themselves, and that they know their story best and they know themselves best.
Hello, and welcome back to the You Need a Counselor podcast. Our quote this week comes to us from our guest. The quote is, "Be who you needed when you were younger." And wow, that's a really, really powerful quote and a really, really powerful message to live by and mantra to live by. So we're so excited to hear from our guest a lot more about what that means to her and how this way of thinking about life and service has really impacted her life. So my name is Julie Johnson. I am the president and founder of Heart and Solutions. We are a counseling agency here in Iowa. We are doing outpatient mental health therapy in our 9 office locations. We're also doing telehealth service on the phone and over the computer, as well as in-home and in-school behavioral health intervention services.
And I'm Chrissa. I am the vice president at Heart and Solutions. So I am in charge of that behavioral health intervention specialist services that Julie was just talking about, where we go in home or do through telehealth or at school and meet with kids ages 4 to 18 on different behavioral skills and goals that they set. And this is our podcast, You Need a Counselor. So the mission of our podcast is that we are designed for people curious about counseling but have barriers keeping them from experiencing the benefits of counseling. Our mission is to share stories about counseling, good, bad, and indifferent, and spread the message that everyone can benefit from mental health and behavioral health counseling services.
Yeah, we post on Sunday nights at 5 p.m. So you can get us on Spotify or anywhere that you listen to podcasts, or on YouTube if you want to watch the entire video and see all of this loveliness happening every single week. So check us out Sunday nights, 5 p.m. Central. We also do post a little teaser video on Friday afternoons so that you can kind of check out what the episode is about and bookmark your time for Sunday nights. Sunday nights, Chrissa and I are putting away our laundry when we listen to this podcast. So if that's you, if you don't want to put away your laundry during the week, don't do it. Put it away on Sunday nights while you listen to the podcast. That gives you the entire week to call your counselor, get scheduled with your counselor, or set up a new appointment for yourself. So today we are so excited because we've got a Heart and Solutions therapist here with us. So we've got Melanie Dierickx here with us today. Welcome, Melanie.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. This is so exciting. So Melanie joins us from our Davenport office location, and we are located there in the CPRC, the Child Protection Response Center there in Davenport, and Melanie is one of the therapists. So if you listened to our episode a few weeks ago with Becca, Melanie is one of the therapists that Becca actually mentioned by name. How wonderful it is to have a therapist there at the CPRC. So I'm going to brag on Melanie a little bit, and then I'm going to just let her tell you her story. So Melanie is a person who kind of grew up with a mom in the social services field, but kind of saw one aspect of social work and was like, that's not really for me, and was not super excited about social work until learning about all of the different ways that a social worker can help children, adults, families, and especially those populations in our society and in our communities that are the most vulnerable populations. Melanie really, really has a heart for social justice, for making sure that people who may be overlooked in our societies or may not be treated with the rights that they deserve, that she is an advocate for every single person in our community. So it's just really great having Melanie here today. And gosh, Melanie works with kids and with adults. And that really has been what drove her to this counseling field, is being able to make a difference in the lives of children. Melanie is also a member of the Quad Cities Black Lives Matter support group. So we are very, very excited to hear more about that as well. So Melanie, can you tell us about Quad City Black Lives Matter support group?
Yeah, so I will give a shout out to Shannon McNeil. She is actually a graduate of Assumption High School out here in Davenport, and she's a student at the University of Iowa. And she and some of her friends got together shortly after the murder of George Floyd and really wanted to provide a space for people to learn. I think a lot of times people who may not be super familiar with this topic and just the hardships that, you know, Black Americans face every day, they feel hesitant to try to engage in this dialogue and fear that they will be spoken down to or just feel they don't really have a place. So we really have banded together to try to provide a lot of education and a safe space for everyone of different backgrounds to speak. So I think what attracted me to this group is, you know, I was in early high school with the passing of Trayvon Martin, and I remember kind of feeling like very out of place in that I felt like this, like he was a child, he was my age, I wasn't really understanding how the conversation was so quickly just kind of shooed away. And so I really have tried to make it a mission of mine in my work to try to be an active ally and really learn ways I can do that to the best of my ability. A lot of what I focused on in my undergraduate education was the intersection of race and the criminal justice system and just the disparities within that. I just love studying the topic. I love trying to find ways that I can use my privilege and my voice to help amplify the lived experiences. And I think this group is an awesome way I'm able to do that.
Very cool. And is this group an online kind of group where you can get involved online? Or do you guys have meetings where you get together and do support? How does somebody get involved in this group?
So we started, I believe we had one in-person meeting. We all met outdoors at Vanderveer Park and we're basically talking about like the general vocabulary. So like covering microaggressions and all of the definitions people may not be incredibly familiar with. And then due to the increase in COVID cases, we shifted to completely virtual. So we've had our core leadership team has created events where people can attend via Zoom. And there's a topic we talk about, we watch videos, we have discussion questions, and really just kind of use that time for people to decompress as well, just because it does feel like, you know, we could be talking about one thing and then something else happens so shortly after. And I know this past summer was incredibly hard for a lot of people involved. So I think for a lot of people, it just gave them a safe space to decompress with people who may be sharing some of the same feelings they have. So I think this month, at the end of the month, we have a Facebook page called QC Black Lives Matter Support Group. We are trying to do a virtual event over Blaxploitation and the impact that that has had and just, you know, mainstream media and kind of the controversial road it's taken. So I'm really excited to learn more about that and get more conversations starting.
Yeah. Can you explain a little bit more about that? And I know you guys are kind of just having the conversations, but it seems like it's just so great that there is a support group where people can have conversations about race and about culture and about society. Like, I think that people, this is one, and you seem to just be very interested in topics that people don't normally like to talk about.
Yep.
So if you want to have a hard conversation or like a potentially awkward conversation, go to Melanie.
Yes.
Because, like you are interested in working with people who have experienced trauma. You're interested in working and advocating for people who have experienced racial disparity, who have experienced oppression, and who have experienced just inequality in life. And there is, I think you kind of identified, I think sometimes, and I experienced this, I'm Asian American, I'm Korean. And I experience this all the time where people like don't know what to say to me.
Right.
And they're sometimes people are so afraid to have a conversation like that. Or even to say like, oh, what nationality are you? People are afraid to do it. They're like, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to say, are you Chinese? Like nobody, no, people know like what the wrong things to say are sometimes, but at the same time, like they don't know what to say. And so a group like this where, it is a safe place and where you can say kind of what you're thinking, because everybody's goal is to better understand. Everybody's goal in this group is to further educate ourselves as to what's happening. So I love that. Can you tell us more about microaggressions?
Yeah. So, I mean, I obviously don't experience them just being, a cis white woman, but microaggressions, I think, at least in my group that I was having that day, I think the majority of us were white. There were a few people of color, but even just everyday things, and like, even if, you're walking down the street and you see someone cross the street because they maybe see like a Black man walking down the street, and it's little things that we don't realize are harmful because they are conditioned in us from such a young age. Microaggressions can be if I have a client who may have a name that may be harder for me to pronounce, like asking, oh, can I just call you this, and like not their actual name. That's something that I think happens to everyone who doesn't tend to have the most Eurocentric names. So I think even things like that, people of color notice from such a young age and just have to adapt to, which I don't think they should have to adapt to it. I think we as, white people should be willing to learn and not even be tolerant, but accepting and nurturing of diversity. And I think we've gotten further than we have been in terms of inclusion, but we have such a long way to go. So I really found it interesting to hear a lot of the experiences within that group of microaggressions and like how early they picked up on it, just because I don't think I was ever that self-aware or aware of my surroundings when I was that age. So it's really interesting, and it's something that you constantly have to reflect on every day in order to break the habit. And in terms of like the uncomfortable conversations, I was even talking to my brother because he's actually an educator in Davenport, and he did tend to be a little more passive than I was surrounding just the advocacy this past summer. And I had a conversation with him, and he's like, I just don't know how to have these conversations because we grew up in a very, very white rural community. So it was just a matter of not being exposed or really being taught anything different. And I think people, once they feel that discomfort, they immediately drop it and run away, where you have to feel that discomfort. That is part of acknowledging privilege and really understanding that ignorance is bliss, and that, through living this way and refusing to acknowledge reality as it is, it's actually so much more harmful to, you know, people who are being oppressed by this system. And it's not doing anyone any good. So I think discomfort is a huge pillar in change in any way. You just kind of have to work through it.
I think that's so interesting about discomfort being necessary, you know, and we do like things that don't make us feel comfortable, like we're outside of our little bubble of, you know, comfort, and it's like, oh, I don't, you know, if you tell me say the ABCs, I can do that very comfortably, right? But in terms of, there's certain conversations that it is harder for people, especially if we're coming from a place of privilege and going, I have no idea what this means, right? And so even trying to, I think even people who are empathetic, right, and who go, okay, I don't want other people to have injustice in their lives. Like, I don't want other people to have these microaggressions in their lives, but like, I don't know what to do about it. And I don't even know what it means sometimes, because like you said, and I love hearing you say, you know, when you say, I haven't experienced that, like I didn't as a child grow up thinking these things or having these things happen to me. It, you know, and I understand that like Black Lives Matter, to me, I know that it says Black lives, but to me, it's not just about Black people. It's not just about African-American people. It's everybody who is experiencing like things that are not fair, things that are dehumanize us as a person, or take away from our individual personality and who we are by blocking us off in some way because of something that we are, right? And so, you know, I think that sometimes people get caught up in like, well, Black Lives Matter is the name of the organization, but really what it is that like, because we can understand that the things that happened to Black people this summer were not okay, for us to be able to say that is huge, I think. And, you know, sometimes I get a little bit like, so as an Asian American, it's hard for me sometimes because it's like, in some ways I feel like I understand. And then in some ways it's like, I know that I don't, but I think for me as an Asian American, it's like, but I feel like I kind of understand a little bit more than maybe some like Caucasian people. Like I understand better than my husband does, you know what I mean? But then it's like, I'm in a gray area where it's like, I don't want to say I do understand because I probably don't fully understand, but I know I understand better than Joe, you know? And so like, when you talk about microaggressions growing up, I mean, I remember when I was in elementary school, and we had I grew up in Massachusetts. We had a fair amount of Asian kids in my school, but definitely we were the minority. And I remember like the stereotypes were like, well, they're Asian, so they're smart and they're skinny. And so it was like, and I remember like, I was not a skinny kid. Okay. I will say like, I was not that stereotype, but it was like the fact that that's the stereotype. And then I wasn't that stereotype made it like all the more pronounced that I wasn't a skinny kid. And then also like, you know, so we had like, I think in Iowa, they called it talented and gifted. We had like SAGE, right? And so I was in that when I was in elementary school. And I remember when I tested into that, and our school did not a great job. Sorry, Hemingway. Did not a great job of like announced this in a big thing. And I remember kids being like, well, yeah, she's smart because she's Asian. And going like, oh, maybe that is why I got into this program, you know? And so, and that was like first grade, you know, I was 6. My kid is 2 years younger than that right now, which is just like blows my mind. But they start so early. And the idea that, yeah, if I'm a Black man and I see somebody like lock their car door when I'm around, right? Or like not want me to walk behind them. Those are things that it's like, it takes away the connection or the possible connection that I have to that fellow human being. Because there is fear now between us. Like you are showing that you have fear of me, not because of who I am, but just because of like, I'm male and I'm Black. Like that's why you have fear of me, but now I have fear of you. Like if somebody has fear of me and I don't know if I am safe now because they do have fear of me, like I have fear of that person. And now there's fear in between us instead of human connection. And I think that, you know, for your group being able to go, okay, what are microaggressions and like what are these things that we're saying and doing, and are we being advocates for, you know, eliminating some of these things? I think that's just so awesome.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit. So we started with this quote of be who you needed when you were a child. Can you tell us about what does that quote mean to you?
Yeah, so I believe I was probably in my junior year of college when I first saw this quote, and it just resonated with me in a way that no quote has before. So I actually grew up with a single parent. My other parents struggled with addiction issues, so they were not able to be a healthy and present parent. And just, I always felt very different growing up, just, you know, in a middle class community where, you know, I'd stay at my parents or at my friend's house and they'd have two parents, and, you know, just not be in a lower socioeconomic status, and just a lot of the experiences I've been through throughout my life, a lot of people haven't had to go through. Just feel like if I would have had someone to kind of guide me through that as best as they could, it would have made a difference for me. And I really strive to be that for other people. And that's really what has pushed me to work with kids. Because when I originally started, my first graduate field placement was in survivor services. So working with survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence. I have worked with kids before in like preschool setting. I love kids, but I absolutely refused to work with them in survivor services. I knew, or I had thought I knew that I just couldn't handle it until I had to. I actually, part of that internship was going on out calls to hospitals. So if someone shows up and is in need of like a sexual assault evidence kit, or there's been a domestic incident that they disclose, just kind of offering them services and being with them so they don't have to be through it alone. My first time was for a 7-year-old little girl. And so that was immersion therapy for sure for me, but it has by far been one of the most shaping experiences I've had as a provider. I was blessed to be able to have a great relationship with her therapist and actually kind of sit in on her therapy sessions and really see what that kind of therapy with kids looked like, or what it could be. And that's just kind of where I found my home. I really love working with kids who have experienced abuse or have experienced growing up with a parent incarcerated or struggling with addiction. I really want to be that stable person that, you know, they can come to my office even once a week and just breathe and get to be a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that Heart and Solutions gives me the opportunity to do that. And I think being, you know, so closely connected to the Child Protective Response Center has provided me with some really strengthening skills I didn't have before. It's definitely difficult at times, and a lot of times I do cry when you know, they leave my office, but I think it makes me a better person, and it makes me able to keep going and provide for the next person no matter what they've been through. And I think in relation to this too, even working with adults who are ready to heal from some of their childhood traumas, I really strive to be that person for them as well. And reassuring them that, it wasn't their fault, and really trying to help them find their way in healing, I think is something that I'm so appreciative of every day.
It's so interesting because as counselors, and if anybody's listening to this and they're kind of on the fence about counselors, sometimes there's this idea that like they won't understand, like nobody will understand. And what you're describing in terms of like your initial kind of reaction of, no, because I've experienced that, I don't want to work with children that have experienced that, and that kind of initial resistance there to that. And then there's that, it's like a switch flipped, and you said, no, because I've experienced that, that's why I do want to work with kids who have experienced that, because I know what I needed. I know that if a supportive person who was going to listen to me and validate me and try to understand what I was going through, if a person, an imperfect person like that, did their best. And so I love how you described it with like, if they tried to the best that they could, right? And so it doesn't have to be a perfect person who's had exactly the same experience, but just that knowledge that, hey, if I had somebody, an adult in my life who was a caring, supportive adult who was willing to listen to me, it would have made all the difference in my life. And I get to do that for other kids who have no other adult able to do that for them. And I think that that's just amazing, and how motivating that you were able to, your experience could have hindered you from helping those kids. But you were able to look at it from this new perspective and see this quote and go, no, that's why I need to be helping, is just amazing. Mhm. So you're primarily working with children now and some adults who may have experienced childhood trauma as well. And so has that always been your main interest, is working with, I know you're very interested in working with kids, but what about adults who have experienced trauma in childhood? How did that kind of come about?
Yeah, so I actually started working with adults when I did, start my internships.
Okay.
It was more so in the advocacy role of a lot of legal advocacy and helping people get orders of protection and stuff like that. And I just kind of going back to being interested in populations that people aren't the most comfortable with. I found something so genuine in being with people hours after something awful happened to them. And I feel like my heart kind of lived in that place of being with someone at their most vulnerable and really just helping them figure out, what's the next step. Um, and so I have really enjoyed working with adults who are currently healing from trauma, or are ready to maybe look at some of the childhood experiences they've had that they realize now were traumatic. I feel my own therapeutic journey, I was one of them. I really didn't have consistent therapy growing up. And then I put myself in therapy when I think I was 19, because I did kind of start realizing some things. So I feel I can really connect with them in that way of being with them in kind of that beginning process of realizing like, this is why I've always done this. And this is why I have this reaction to this. And just being with them and helping them identify some of the triggers that they may not have known, and even just processing the event itself. Just because with a lot of adults with childhood trauma, sexual abuse specifically, I have quite a few clients in that realm, there are so many repressed memories. And I think it's interesting to see how we kind of shift into that child mind again while processing it. And I love getting to work with them where they are in that sense of getting their inner child to understand and feel validated, and then learning, as their present self, what it looks like to acknowledge that I am a survivor of any kind of trauma, and learning, this doesn't define me, but it is part of who I am. And this is how I can then go on living, with that.
And it sounds like, so when you're working with children who have experienced trauma, or you're working with adults who have experienced trauma, you're in both ways, you're working with those same experiences, whether they were a child when they experienced it or whether they were an adult. And it's just beautiful how you've been able to experience therapy and say, hey, I want to try this because there are things happening, or I'm having thoughts, or I'm having actions or outcomes or feelings that like aren't serving me, right? And what is that? And so being able to at the age of 19 say, no, I'm going to try therapy, I'm going to try counseling. That's amazing. And then here you are as a counselor working with other people who are kind of on that same journey to healing.
Yes, therapy has played a huge role in my life, and I never thought it would. I don't know if I ever thought I would turn out to be a therapist, but it's had such a wonderful impact on my life, both as a professional and just as a person.
Yeah, that's amazing. Do you ever watch Good Girls? Have you guys watched that on Netflix? There's an episode where I tried to take a screenshot and Netflix will not let you screenshot it. But there's a part where the younger sister, she goes to a therapist. She has a negative experience, and then she yells to her kid, "You know who needs therapists? Therapists!" And I wanted to screenshot that so badly. Because it's so true. It's not that, we all need therapists. It's that everybody can benefit from a therapist. And a lot of times, people think, well, you are a therapist, you don't need a therapist. It's like, no, I know that it works. If I didn't think it worked, I wouldn't be in this field. There would be no point to being in this field if I didn't know that therapy works and believe in it 100%. And it's just amazing, your journey from, somebody who was wanting to overcome some experiences and overcome some previous beliefs and thoughts and actions, and then coming through and going, yeah, let me help other people through this, because I know that it's hard. I know that it's a struggle and a challenge to start. Yeah. So you were in an advocacy role with adults, working with survivors who had just experienced a traumatic event, so a sexual assault or a rape. And so from that kind of way of helping people to now being a therapist, where now you're meeting with people weekly or every other week, that's kind of a different role than kind of that first support person that's there and saying, here are your options, and here's what could happen next. Here's, all of those things, just trying to kind of keep the person safe first of all, and making sure they feel safe and heard. But then going into that kind of longer term counseling experience, how has that shift been for you?
Yeah, it's definitely been a shift, going from kind of that crisis intervention mindset of establishing safety and making sure they're in a safe place or they have an escape route and that kind of thing, to understanding that, my role right now is to help with their healing, which I've loved that transition. And it did take a little bit though to understand that, that wasn't my job anymore, and that, they did have someone doing that. So I kind of needed to take a back seat. But I think while it's been kind of a difficult one, I think I managed it pretty well. And it's just, and you guys can maybe relate to this as well, but knowing that clients who may still be in a situation that isn't super safe, having them leave your office, you're kind of like, please don't go.
Yeah.
But understanding that that person does have the resources that they need, and that, even if something does happen, your office will still be there the week, following.
Yeah.
And understanding that they do have what they need to take care of themselves, and that they know their story best and they know themselves best. So I think kind of cognitively correcting that, I don't want to say helicopter parent, but like kind of that protective role in me has been something that I had to get used to. But I think I'm in a good place with it.
Absolutely. I love that. I mean, if anybody's listening and kind of thinking about, starting counseling and knowing that, hey, I've had some traumatic experiences, and so I'd like to start. I feel like with trauma, there are so many situations where our power has just been completely taken away. And then sometimes in certain kinds of treatment, it feels like, okay, any power that I still had is being taken away even more. And I think from a clinician side, the fact that you are recognizing that, oh my gosh, I want to keep my clients safe so badly. I want them to be happy and joyful and experience all of the things. And to be able to say, like, but even something like happiness, or even something like freedom or safety, is still every person's choice to make. And sometimes safety to us is not safety to that person, right? Like physical safety is not always psychological safety. And so we might look at it and go, oh, physical safety, do that, right? But for the client, it's like, no, psychological safety, right, is more pressing, is screaming louder in that moment. And for you as a counselor to go, okay, as a person, I really want to make this choice for you, right? Like, I really want you to do this or that, or to, help you stay safe or happy in the way that I want for you. It's allowing every client that walks in and walks out of the office to know that they have their own life and their own journey, and we don't get to decide that. And I love that, because it is so tempting as a counselor, and especially what you're touching on, you're hitting the nail right on the head, because I used to do crisis intervention and counseling. I was an on-call just as a volunteer on the weekends, and I was also practicing therapist. And so I would have some overlap sometimes where I'd get a call, I'd go meet with somebody in the hospital, and then the next week they'd be referred for counseling. I'm in a small town. And so, the need to take off one hat and put on another was such a transition. And I love how you identify, this, it is a different role, and both are so important. And, when you're doing your therapeutic role, that could mean that you and the client don't talk about the trauma for like weeks at a time, months at a time, talk about it, right? And that's still okay. I think that's so important for anybody who's on the fence about counseling to hear, is that even if you've got trauma in your history, or if you've recently experienced a trauma, you can go to a counselor, still make progress in counseling, still work with that counselor, and only process that trauma when you're ready to process it. I think that's so important for people to hear, because sometimes there's this sense of like, well, I go to the doctor when my leg is broken, so I go to a counselor when I've had trauma, and they're supposed to fix it. And it's like, No, it's when you are ready to process that through. And fixing it means totally different things to everybody. Whereas like medical model, yeah, I break my leg, give me a cast, right? So I think there is kind of that thought process sometimes. So that's such an important point, Melanie. I love that. Do you ever see barriers to starting counseling for people who maybe are interacting with an advocate, maybe they're safety planning to leave a domestic violence situation, maybe they're safety planning to live in a safer environment, something like that? Are there barriers to counseling that you identify there that you've experienced?
Yes. I think for a lot of people who may be in that situation with domestic violence in particular, they are a lot of times under the same insurance. So billing wise, their perpetrator could potentially be, able to locate them or know that they're going to this place. Or even I was doing a referral earlier, and I'm still in the automatic tendency when asking, can I leave a detailed message? I say, is this a safe number to leave a message on? Because I think a lot of times people who may be in the therapeutic role don't think about like, oh, maybe the perpetrator has access to their phone, or, just things like that, trying to coordinate are my actions in helping this person putting them at risk? Because a lot of times in trying to coordinate services, there are gaps. So we can't get them in as soon as we want to. So really ensuring that my actions are minimizing the potential impact it could have on their safety. I also think transportation has been a huge one that I run into quite a bit. So we have to be pretty creative in scheduling and trying to coordinate, my sister has this day off and Melanie may have this time available. So barriers like scheduling, insurance wise, even getting letters sent to a different residence or mailing address is something that I often run into. So a lot of times I'll recommend like even open a PO box, like just a safe space to get this information is helpful in trying to help de-escalate those kinds of situations and barriers. And I think a huge barrier, even if someone is in an actively violent situation or not, is this therapist going to ask me why I haven't left yet or why I didn't leave?
Yeah.
That I think is the most overarching fear and barrier a lot of survivors face. And the answer to that is a good therapist will never ask you that, because it doesn't matter. It's not someone's job to ask that. It's not their job to judge you. They don't know your experience. They don't know the situation. And something I often tell people when they do express that fear to me is, you fell in love with this person for a reason in the first place. If you would have known that it would have ended like this, you wouldn't have gotten this far, So I think just the fear of judgment is a huge barrier in both, people surviving domestic violence or sexual assault. What were you wearing? That just the very insensitive comments that they get on a daily basis, which, in the therapeutic setting, those types of questions should never be asked. They should never even be thought about by a practitioner, because it's not our job to judge. It's our job to validate them and help them in healing.
Absolutely. I think that's such a great point about fear of judgment being a barrier to, wow, my hair. Okay, sorry. Fear of judgment being a very, very real barrier to starting counseling. Starting counseling is vulnerable. You are sharing, and you come into the assessment, you are asked a lot of personal questions about your situation and your family and all of that. And it is a vulnerable place to be. And, you know, a lot of healing does require that we be vulnerable and that we be able to express exactly what we're feeling and express exactly what we're experiencing. But in order to be able to do that, we have to feel safe in that session. And we have to be able to know that this person is not going to have preconceived ideas about me because of my situation. And that question of, yeah, why do you stay? Oh my gosh, that is, even when you said it, it was like, it's like nails on a chalkboard.
Right.
It's, oh my gosh, because there are infinite answers to that question. And like you said, none of them matter for the therapeutic process. The therapeutic process is about what that person is now experiencing and how that person is feeling about what is going on around them. And part of the things that that person may be having uncomfortable feelings about is other people's judgment about their relationship and about their situation. So I run a nonprofit. It's a very, very small nonprofit, but I run it with my daughter, and it's called DV Pet Solutions. And we started it because we were finding that when I would do safety planning at crisis intervention, a lot of times in the safety plan, we would come across, what about my pets? And in Iowa, that's not even what about my dog and cat. That's what about my goats? Like, what about my chickens? Like, this is not something that Massachusetts has a lot of, but in Iowa, it is like, what about my horses? You know? And the idea that an abuser can and will use animals, children, for manipulation and for retaliation, and knowing that, well, yes, maybe I would want to leave, but could I leave my cats behind, knowing that they would be killed, or knowing that they'd be put outside? They don't have claws, you know. Or to me, I might get some flack for saying that animals are like children, but to me, like,
Yeah.
animals are like my kids. Like, you know, I have a kid and I have two cats, and like, I wouldn't leave my kid with an abuser, and I wouldn't leave my cats with an abuser. I just wouldn't. And if there's financial abuse happening, which so many people do not understand about financial abuse whatsoever. And so there's this idea that, yeah, in my situation with my, you know, I have a checking account, I have a debit card, I could go and stay at a hotel, or I could go stay with my parents. Well, what if my parents are just as abusive? You know, what if my partner is financially abusive, and so I don't have a debit card? I get, you know, I get $20 to go to the grocery store, and I need to bring back a receipt and change for any shopping that I do, right? And so there's I think you hit the nail on the head earlier when you were talking about privilege. And I think that privilege comes into the conversation when it comes to racial disparity and racial injustice. And it also comes in when it comes to domestic violence situations, because there is a privilege that creates the judgment, I think, right? Like, anytime there's judgment, about a person, like, why isn't this person leaving? Like, that their partner is terrible to them, why did they stay? If there's judgment in that, it comes from privilege. It comes from the idea that, well, I would get on my cell phone and call 911. Okay, if you're in an abusive relationship, you probably don't have a cell phone, because isolation is such a big part of that abusive relationship. So can you just get on your cell phone and call 911? And if you do, then what's going to happen, right? Are you still going to be safe? Are you going to have a place to go? And what about your kids? And what about your pets? And what about your home that you've, you know, spent your entire life in? Just all of these different pieces that I think, when there's any judgment, it shows a lack of understanding that these are real pieces of the abuse. The abuse itself is what makes it difficult to leave, not the person that's experiencing the abuse. And I think there's just such a, sorry, I feel like I'm on a soapbox right now,
No.
but there's just such a misunderstanding about domestic violence and intimate partner violence, especially. And financial abuse is such a real thing. And it's a term that isn't in most people's vocabulary. They don't understand what that is, but it's so important. So yeah, I think it's amazing what you're doing, and I think it's amazing that you've been able to, work with children, work with adults who've experienced trauma, work with adults who are doing like you are, and saying, I'm going to invest in myself, I'm going to go to counseling, I'm going to start this process. And as long or as short as that process takes or is, I'm still going to have the benefit of that supportive person in my life. I deserve that. And the children that you're serving, they deserve that. It's amazing way to look at service and the way that we support the people around us and in our lives.
I'm Melanie Dierickx, and I need a counselor.
That's right. Me too. So does Chrissa. So do I. Awesome. All right. So if you are interested in starting therapy with Melanie, if you are in the Quad Cities area, Davenport area, adults, children, so if you've got kiddos that you think would benefit from having that supportive person. And it's not to say that you as a parent are not supportive, but like you're their parent. So, so my parents were, my mom's super supportive, but like she's my mom, okay? So we need that external person to really hear us. So if you're interested in getting signed up for services with Melanie, give us a call, 800-531-4236.
Like Julie mentioned at the beginning, we post every Sunday night at 5, so save up your laundry, do it with us while you listen to the newest episode, or prepare yourself for Monday morning to call a counselor yourself, or to schedule for your appointment that week if you hadn't yet.
And feel free to send us questions. So if you've got questions or if you need resources that you think that Melanie can help with, send us a message on Facebook Messenger at You Need a Counselor Podcast, or on Instagram at You Need a Counselor. Because Melanie, we would love to have you back on the show again. I feel like we could have filled another episode. And so if you send us questions for Melanie on there, we'll have Melanie back on and we'll ask her those questions on the podcast.
All right, I'm Chrissa Brown.
And I'm Julie Johnson, and we need a counselor.
And so do you.
Bye.